We boycott all of their shows. We boycott the charade. We don't gather in parks to celebrate an illusion. We won't pretend that explosions overhead make us independent while our rights, our voices, and our futures are being sold off behind our backs. Instead, we reclaim the day with solidarity and silence.
It is the 4th of July, and history is messy, and that's why you're seeing so many people on social media tell you that they're not celebrating this year for various reasons. Some of them have to do with immigration. Some of them have to do with Donald Trump. Some of them have to do with historical, quote-unquote, wrongs that they are still mad about today, and that's fine. But I will remind you of something before we get started here. America's pretty awesome. Don't believe me? Check the scoreboard. I'm not saying we're undefeated, but I would make the argument that we've won a lot more of the big battles than we've lost. And because of that, America is the freest nation on the planet. It's true. The best nation on the planet. It's true. And a beacon that a lot of people look at around the world and say, hey, I'd much rather live there. And if you don't believe me, then just know that right now we're having to take people and remove them by force while people are trying to break into the country. Okay, so you might want to think about those things for a second. Yes, there have been tough losses. Yes, there have been big wins. But anyone out there complaining about America today because of whatever group they're a part of or that they feel bad for some group, I think misses the point of American history and world history for that matter. So let's start with the Revolutionary War.
Here's a couple of things America got right. Cars and freedom.
Am I the one that finds it rather odd that we don't hear anyone talking about how we stole the land from the British? Does anyone find that strange? Now, we could have started with the issues with the natives before the Revolutionary War, but we'll come back and we'll touch on some of that a little bit later. The American colonies were fed up with British taxes and control. They were tired of being governed from an ocean away, no taxation without representation. And they said, leave us be. The British said, no, we're not going to. So a war were declared. And after guerrilla tactics found their way into battle for one of the first times, it looked like the Americans won the whole thing. Yes, with the help of the French, no question about that. And a big mistake on their part because America, well, let's just put it this way, it became the starting point for some revolutionary wars in other places that didn't turn out so well for people like the French. But that is another story for another day that I will promise you I will never get into. And I will just merely point out that if you look at the scoreboard, that's 1-0. America wins the big one, is formed, and then they move on.
We support Palestine 100%. We do not believe that the state of Israel should exist because it's a military enclave of the corporations and mainly U.S. and European powers. It's sad that Jewish people have Zionism as their leaders. I think they should get rid of them. And everyone should return to wherever they're from. They're stealing their land, just like the U.S. stole the land from Mexico and indigenous people here. So that's why we support Palestine.
This is our city, and this was Mexico. You can't kick us out of the land that was ours. Donald Trump! Fascism! Let our people free! Let our people free! ¡Suelta nuestra gente!
So let's move on and talk about the Mexican-American War. Yes, the Mexican-American War took off because the Mexicans were not too happy about Manifest Destiny. We declared that we were going to grow across the continent and we were going to go from ocean to ocean. And the Mexicans said, well, we're not having any of that. And we said, well, you probably are going to have to deal with it. So we decided to deal with it. Now, as this was being dealt with, the American army made its way into Mexico City. And as they were in Mexico City, I think the Mexicans realized that they were pretty much screwed. And they said, in order to save their country, that they would sell at the barrel of a gun a large portion of it to the Americans, California, Arizona, New Mexico, for $15 million. And now we still have people trying to make the argument that this is somehow Mexican land. It's not. It's actually not. The Mexican land was Spanish land before that, and Indian land before that. So America wins. It puts one up on the scoreboard, and it says, thank you very much. This is ours, and you can complain about it for the next 150 years, and it really isn't going to matter because we're bigger. We have it, and you cannot have it back. Let's talk about the Civil War.
Today is July 4th. And while some folks are out here with flags and fireworks, I'm here to remind you, ain't nothing about this day worth celebrating for foundational Black Americans. 4th of July, 1776, so-called Independence Day, that wasn't the beginning of our freedom. That was the height of our hell.
In 1776, he's correct. Black men and women would not feel free. And that battle was actually going on while they were deciding how to form the new nation. Were they going to free the slaves? And those people who wanted to free the slaves obviously lost. So that's why we get a little bit of a do-over here. Now, that is not to say that there was not an abolitionist tone throughout American history up to this point, because there obviously was, and slavery tore the nation apart. You can make the argument, if you want to, that it was about states' rights, and I would always say states' rights to what? And you would say states' rights to own slaves. So yes, it was over slavery. That's really what this was all about. And hundreds of thousands of dead, including a president of the United States. Later, we were back as one nation. Strong and powerful, yes, divided, no question about that, but freedom was declared for everyone living within the borders. And yeah, Reconstruction was no picnic, obviously, but it was a big win for humanity and a big win for the country. You put one up on the scoreboard, America wins, but also America loses in this one because the Union and Confederate soldiers are both considered to be Americans. But in American history, the Confederacy are seen as losers and treated as such. When people see the Confederate flag in modern American times, they merely point out what a bunch of losers they were and how they almost tore the country apart. And you know what? There's really not much to say about how wrong that is. Now we have people waving Mexican flags around after we beat them, and nobody really makes that same argument. But what about the Native Americans? Let's talk a little bit about them.
First, let me just say, I strongly believe and take very seriously that we must acknowledge that the government of the United States stole land, took land from the tribes, and that there must be a restoration of that ownership for those lands that were possessed by the tribes. So that is a value I hold very dearly and very strongly.
Now, Kamala Harris is a clown. We should all know that. The former vice president making these statements about stolen land. And yeah, we could go back and put this at the beginning of the video if we want to, but I think it fits here better because after the Civil War, this is when we really ramped up the moving around of Indians in order to clear the way for American expansion. And look, let's look at this completely in an honest way. The Indians were not a peaceful group of people that were pushed off the land first by colonialists and then Americans. That's just not what happened. They were warring tribes fighting with each other before a white man ever stepped foot on the continent. And to pretend otherwise is almost laughable, which is pointed out, I think, in a pretty good way by an HBO movie called Bury Me at Wounded Knee. And it's laid out right here in this clip.
Sitting Bull requested this council. We await his words.
Take your soldiers out of here. They scare the game away.
Very well, sir. Tell me then, how far away should I take my men?
You must take them out of our lands.
What precisely are your lands?
These are the lands where my people lived before you whites first came.
I don't understand. We whites were not your first enemies. Why don't you demand back the land in Minnesota where the Chippewa and others forced you from years before?
The Black Hills are sacred land given to my people by Wakantonka.
Very convenient to cloak your claims in spiritualism. And what would you say to the Mormons and others who believe that their God has given to them Indian lands in the West?
I would say they should listen to Wakantonka.
No matter what your legends say, you didn't sprout from the plains like the spring grasses, and you didn't coalesce out of the ether. You came out of the Minnesota woodlands, armed to the teeth, and set upon your fellow man. You massacred the Kiowa, the Omaha, the Ponca, the Oto, and the Pawnee without mercy. And yet you claim the Black Hills as a private preserve bequeathed to you by the Great Spirit.
And who gave us the guns and powder to kill our enemies? And who traded weapons to the Chippewa and others who drove us from our home?
Chief Sitting Bull, the proposition that you were a peaceable people before the appearance of the white man is the most fanciful legend of all. You were killing each other for hundreds of moons before the first white stepped foot on this continent. You conquered those tribes, lusting for their game and their lands, just as we have now conquered you for no less noble a cause.
This is your story of my people.
This is the truth, not legend.
That is an honest take on American history. And if more people talked about it that way, then maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't have this whole, this is on occupied land. It's not occupied land. It's lost land. You lost. You have no claim to it. And since it's 2025, let's talk a little bit about this idea of occupied land. We heard about it in the clips where the individuals were saying that California was occupied land and Israel is occupying Palestine and all these other things. Guys, look, this is as simple as I can put it, and the Indians are a perfect example of this. Fighting has gone on forever over resources, over borders, over religion, and over stuff way dumber than any of that. And when you lose territory, and that's how it is. Put one up on the board for the Americans here because they pushed the people that were controlling this land completely off it. And they said, this is ours now. And that has happened throughout history. Now, I understand that it's hip and it's cool to say we should immediately go back to the previous owners. But here is my question to close out this segment on Native Americans. What date? And I mean that. Pick a date in history, world history, where all the borders will revert to where they were at that particular point in time. And if you can get agreement amongst world leaders, do it. And then let's see exactly what happens. Because as we talk about this, it's not 1861. It's not 1776. It is 2025. I don't know what you want to do with all the people that have moved throughout the world. But for some reason, we hear this phrase settler colonialism a lot on days like today. And I always wonder why that is. You're telling me that anyone that comes in and settles somewhere is somehow displacing others. Well, then why is it that the people who make those arguments are completely fine with unfettered immigration into the United States of America? It doesn't make any sense. It is not consistent in any way, shape, or form. And those arguments should be dismissed outright. Now, at the end of the Native American situation, yes, there were vast territories gained. There was a horrific cost. And yes, Native communities were decimated. But at the same time, Native communities decimated other communities before all of this started. So if we want to try to make the argument that, oh my God, this is the worst thing that ever happened in American history, I would go back a little bit of a way and I would say, well, what about before American history, where Native communities wiped out other Native communities? This is a win for the United States of America. And again, that's a good thing for the world. So, folks, you can look at the scoreboard all you want. America has wins, independence, expansion, the end of slavery. Yes, it's clear. Now, you can look at what's happened during that time, and not all of it is great, but it's the best possible outcome. If you want to make the argument that America isn't awesome, you're wrong. And there's a reason why you're doing that from within America's borders. So if you say that America's history is messy and, oh my God, it's the worst, that's fine. But what you're doing is fighting for your ideals. You're sometimes failing, luckily, but you're still fighting for those ideals. You're pushing forward and you're trying to change things. And maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But here's the truth of the matter. If America is so terrible, you would be trying to leave. It truly is that simple. If those other cultures and countries are superior, you would go to live in them, as opposed to trying to change this country into that country and this culture into that culture. So go out and celebrate Independence Day, because even though you don't know it, you are lucky to be an American. And if you're not going to leave, you might as well embrace it.
We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.